Welcome to the S&D Group press conference and this session. And I hand over to our group president, Iratxe García Perez.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for to be here. Gracias por.
Thank you for coming to this press conference. We'll give you an overview of the week in Parliament during this plenary session. And we'll be able to answer any questions you may have. First and foremost, we have 4 new members in our political group. Marcos Ros from Spain, Victor Negrescu from Romania, Leonora Romana from France, and Ivana Sevkovic from Croatia. So 4 new members joining the group following the withdrawal of the United Kingdom. And we'll be able to give you further information on the committees they'll be working in. We'll be having a debate in Parliament on the state of play of negotiations between the UK and the EU, the future agreement. We have a broad consensus in this Parliament. As I said in plenary, I think we need to acknowledge the good work done by the European Commission and Mr. Barnier's team. They've laid down negotiating guidelines for the future relationship, covering all the issues which are essential in our view. And furthermore, the success or otherwise of these negotiations will depend on the willingness of the UK government to respond to these essential questions during the negotiations. It's a question of maintaining the essential values of the European Union. We also talk about the internal market policy. The objective should be tariff and quota-free access, but there are legal issues as well. Fisheries issues, transport, the freedoms, all this should be part of an overall package. And the UK needs to be aware of the need for fair competition. And then one further point. One thing we have learned over the months of negotiations relating to Brexit has been the need for unity. If we have unity, we are stronger. And this is our guiding principle over the next few months until the negotiations finish. And the European Parliament is very much prepared to cooperate with the European Commission. And I would recall that the day-to-day negotiations are done by the Commission's negotiating team, but the final okay to the agreement has to be given by the Parliament. We have to ratify the agreement, and time is of the essence. We'll also be discussing the financial framework this week. This will set the bases, the groundwork for what we do over the next few years. We are very concerned, very worried by the news we're getting from the Council. Things are stuck there. Some countries are being very uncooperative, and they're going very much against what the Parliament as an institution defends. The president of the council isn't even coming to tomorrow's debate, and that's quite symbolic, really, quite typical and worrying. Obviously, there are bilateral discussions going on with governments, but the fact that Mr. Michel doesn't actually want to come to Parliament to hear what our position is, I think is very worrying. It will be a public debate, and I do hope that those in the Council will take note of it. We have a very clear position in Parliament, and the Council should not forget that we're part of the negotiations, and we have to stress at the points in our resolution. We can't do more with less. We cannot maintain the policies such as cohesion and agricultural policy with less money. And then there are the new issues such as the new Green Deal and the childhood guarantee and migration policy. We cannot do more Europe with fewer resources. And this is going to be the position we defend as Parliament. The Council will have to listen to our very clear message. Then there are some other issues cropping up this week. There's the resolution on the threat to the rule of law in Poland. Our group took the initiative to start the work on this resolution. We are very worried about the drift we're seeing in Poland. The Law and Justice Party, their actions are just worsening the situation. And if the reform goes through, this would end the supremacy of European law, and Polish judges, Polish courts would not be able to turn to the European Court of Justice. This is unacceptable for a member state of the European Union. This is the point we want to stress. And as we've said on previous occasions, we need a European mechanism to guarantee democracy and the rule of law, as well as compliance with fundamental rights. We continue to stress this, and we hope that the Council will agree to accept interinstitutional negotiations as soon as possible. And this week, too, we have a topical debate proposed by our group. We're going to have a debate on social Europe in a digital world. This has to do with the very rapid changes we're seeing in the world and in Europe, issues such as the development of artificial intelligence and the ethical boundaries that should be laid down. And this is something we spend time thinking about in our group. We've been working on a document setting out the common position of our political group. It is accessible on our website if you'd like to get some extra information. This gives you the S&D position relating to digital policy, the digital revolution that Europe has to face, and the social dimension thereof. And we are in contact with journalists. Our bureau is involved in various initiatives to tell you about our document. And of course, we're very much available if individually any of you would like some further information about our position and the paper we have drawn up. And I would also like to remind you that this week, the European Commission will be presenting its gender equality strategy. Gender equality is an essential priority for the European agenda for the next few years, in our view. A society which deems itself to be a developed society, which wants to make progress, has to acknowledge that gender equality is vital. This needs to be something cross-cutting across all our policies. We talk about combating the gender pay gap. It's unacceptable for women to continue to earn less than men for the same job. And then there's the issues such as women's position on the labour market. and fighting gender violence, the ratification of the Istanbul Convention, and the role of the EU in pushing legislative initiatives to combat this terrible plague of gender violence. Women are still being murdered just because they are women. And we share this responsibility with the Commission. We await the presentation of the strategy, and we will do what we can in our group to make sure it is implemented and to make sure this is a shared struggle. And I would conclude with an issue which is a very important one, that this was the vote at the beginning of the plenary with regard to putting a debate on this plenary's agenda on the situation in Venezuela and the Spanish government. I'd just like to share a couple of thoughts with you on this matter. No one can call into question the commitment of this Parliament and the Socialist Group when it comes to seeking a solution to the conflict affecting the Venezuelan people. They are suffering an unsustainable situation. We should be capable of acting to try and find a way out of this conflict. This means holding free and democratic elections with all due guarantees. What we cannot accept is that this issue should be used by some parties to attack the positions of some national governments, as we've seen done by Ciudadanos, the Citizens' Party, the Popular Party, and the People's Party, and Vox. And this debate is something for the Spanish Parliament. Opposition to the Spanish government takes place in the Spanish Parliament. And Ciudadanos, Citizens' Party, are in the opposition in the Spanish Parliament. And there's going to be a debate in the Spanish Parliament on Wednesday, and it's very strange to have a debate on this issue in the European context, even before this debate takes place. And monitoring of compliance with sanctions is up to member states, not the European institutions. Compliance with sanctions imposed on the Venezuelan government is something for national governments to do. It's a national debate, and we're running a big risk here in this European Parliament because the European Parliament has always been highlighted as a forum where we avoid trench warfare between parties. It's a very fragmented parliament, politically speaking, so we need to negotiate, we need to reach agreements. And if we start using this parliament as a place for national battles, this will be a deterioration of European democracy. This is something very serious. I hope this will be a one-off and not something that the groups will adopt from now on. Questions now.
Have any questions? Est-ce qu'il y a des questions?
Any questions? Any questions?
Said? Yes, please, go ahead.
I've got a question on something you didn't mention. Coronavirus. I'm from the Portuguese broadcaster, RTP. Anything from Europe on how we act to combat this? Well, clearly, yes, and this Parliament has had a debate on this. How do we coordinate prevention policies and implementation of protocols for action, joint protocols, to stop this becoming an epidemic in the EU? This Parliament has taken action. We've had a debate, and we are monitoring the coordination in the European institutions and between those institutions with the member states.
Questions? If that's not the case, I wish you good. Oui. Wait, allez-y.
Rob Herbout, VRT Belgian television. Is the S&D group supporting the free trade agreement with Vietnam? Maybe I've missed it. I was a bit late in the press conference, but are you supporting the free trade agreement with Vietnam?
El grupo de trabajo.
The working group, the S&D working group in the intercommittee decided to give its consent in January to the agreement, given the commitment made by the Vietnamese authorities. The Prime Minister and the Minister for Trade accepted a road map including various commitments to reform of labor law. They're going to ratify the ILO conventions. This is excellent news, which shows us how important the work of the political groups in this parliament is when negotiating international trade agreements. We've said this in our group on many occasions. Trade is not bad as such, but there have to be conditions for trade relations, and we have to use international trade policy as an instrument to improve the lives of people who live in the countries with which we trade. We need to improve labor conditions, environmental conditions, and human rights. And this is the work done by the European Parliament with regard to the Vietnam agreement. Over the last few months, we'll have the final debate in our group. This afternoon, we'll have a final position as a group. Then there may be some slightly differing positions, but what I'd like to stress is the work done by the chair of the Committee, our colleague Bernd Lange, and other colleagues involved, because we've managed to push forward a raft of reforms which are vital to improve the lives of men and women in Vietnam in the labor, social, and environmental sphere.
If everything is said, then I would like to wish you a good week. Thanks a lot. Merci beaucoup.